There are few things more dramatic than the arrival of a storm. The dark gray clouds, the hard rain, the concussive boom, and the crackling lightning is utterly cinematic and a fantastic backdrop to literally any situation a party of adventurers could find themselves in. Imagine a bolt of lightning illuminating the sky as swords swing at orc raiders. Rain sizzling as the fireball explodes upon a group of skeletons. The pounding of thunder drowning out the party as they sneak up on the big bad. However, with any person, place, or thing within the multiverse of D&D, magic never leaves the ordinary alone. Imagine that bolt of lightning illuminating the sky. Imagine that rain sizzling as the fireball explodes. Imagine that pounding thunder as the party sneaks towards the big bad. Any and all of that. And then imagine, with no warning, the storm begins to descend out of the sky. The worm-like clouds, the living storm. Let's talk about the thunderworm. So, what are we going to be covering? In this episode, first we're going to talk about what a thunderworm is. Next, we'll dive into its origins. After that, we'll explore how I rebuilt the thunderworm for the 2024 edition of D&D and how they can fare in combat. We'll close out then with some ideas about how to add the thunderworm not only as a monster of the week, but as part of an ongoing campaign. There are so many worms that show up in Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm not even referring to dragons. Those are called worms and not worms. I would be extremely careful not to confuse the two of them should you ever meet a dragon. When I'm referring to worms, I mean worms that typically have long bodies, no limbs, usually no eyes, and rarely, if ever, related to dragons. Worms have shown up repeatedly through the course of D&D, with the purple worm being the king of worms. Yet, the thunderworm has only ever shown up once in any edition of D&D, which is a shame because it's a lovely piece of D&D weirdness. Within the pages of the Fiend Folio of 3rd edition was the thunderworm, essentially a storm in worm shape capable of unleashing lightning and, more importantly, where it gets its namesake from, claps of thunder. And it's a pretty short entry. As mentioned, the thunderworm is basically a living storm in the shape of a worm. The problem with a single entry for a monster is it can leave a lot to be desired. A thunderworm, for instance, the things that we know about it is pretty limited. For instance, a thunderworm's body is literally made of clouds. Mechanically even, since it has the incorporeal trait in 3.5, which allows it to travel through others and engulf them within its internal storm. Lightning dances throughout their form as their movement causes rumbling noises similar to thunder. The thunderworms, they live in the clouds, they float well above the world, and really that's all we kind of know about them. There's no real habitat listed besides the sky. There's no creatures that it hunts or hunt it. It's a one-entry wonder. Truth be told, when I started to explore the creature, I was pretty uninterested in the thunderworm. There wasn't much meat for me to sink my teeth into to try to really get a hold of this creature. So why go through examining this monster in this video at all if there isn't some deep lore to dive into, a mystery to solve of this weirdly shaped air elemental? Well, therein lies the hook. This cloud-like creature, this thunderworm with lightning and thunder emanating from it, is not an elemental. No, it's a magical beast. Yes, you heard that right. The thunderworm's creature type is a magical beast, which currently does not exist in 5e. Back in 3.5, a magical beast was similar to a beast, but usually had higher intelligence and usually possessed supernatural or extraordinary abilities. Example of a magical beast include a basilisk, a kraken, and the Trask. Basically, it was the catch-all monster type of 3.5. In 5e, we would classify these as monstrosities, also being the catch-all category for monsters that don't fit into the other types. While by some definition, an air elemental is alive, a thunderworm is literally a living creature, not an animated element. The rules of 3.5 call it a magical beast and not elemental power given form. At least not wholly. Since it's a living creature, that to me begs the question of how can a cloud be called a beast? Also, where does the thunderworm come from that could allow such a thing to come into being? Well, like I said, the monster entry is pretty short, so we don't know officially. No origin is given or even hinted at. So let's go hunting for it. Book-wise, the Thunderworm was revealed to the world with Fiend Folio. While this book does contain plenty of fiends, the book ranges from aberrations to elementals to magical beasts. What really ties the monsters of the book together was the emphasis with those of extraplanar origins, which implies that the Thunderworm is not from the material plane, which makes sense because it looks like a giant living thunderstorm in the shape of a snake. While there are many, many crazy creatures born in other planes, a living storm still seems like a step too far. What else do we know? Despite its appearance, once again, a giant living thunderstorm is not listed as an elemental. Instead, the Thunderworm is listed as a magical beast. Our Thunderworm has an intelligence of 14, which tracks with magical beasts. Thunderworms also have the subtype of incorporeal. An incorporeal creature basically is defined as having no physical body and being made of clouds. That seems like it checks out. Their alignment is always neutral, so unlikely to be tied to one of the energy planes, at least directly. Finally, Thunderworms do not speak, but they do understand Common, Aurorian, and Giant. With all that to consider, which plane do these smart, magical beasts come from? My first thought was, despite not being an actual elemental, maybe the Thunderworm still comes from the elemental plane of air. My very first reason being they are giant cloud monsters, which seems to fit the plane of air shtick. After all, if you slap the elemental on it instead of magical beast as the creature type, no one would bat an eye. In a link to the plane of air, Thunderworms both speak Aryan, the language of air elementals, and Giant, the language of cloud or storm giants that can be found on the airplane. While giants and their language can be found across the multiverse, creatures typically only know Aryan if they have some sort of connection to the plane of air. Still, Thunderworms are classified as magical beasts and not elementals, so my next question is, do the elemental planes have non-elemental life? I mean, they are certainly capable of supporting life beyond elementals, to various degrees, given all the planar travelers that go there, whether they do intentionally or not. What about other forms of life besides elementals? Very specifically, do any of the elemental planes have magical beasts that originate from them? In my research looking for that very question, I found one really good example, the frost salamander. The ice blue, six-legged, freezing breath frost salamander is a type of lizard that dwells in the cold regions of the material planes. However, it is mainly found in the elemental planes of air and ice. In fact, that is where they originated from. Interestingly, in 5th edition, frost salamanders are actually specifically classified as elementals. However, in 3rd edition, where the Thunderworm is from, frost salamanders were considered magical beasts. Magical beasts whose homeland was the elemental plane of air and the para-elemental plane of ice. Just one example is all I need to prove that the elemental planes are capable of producing non-elemental life. In fact, very specifically, they are capable of producing magical beasts. For those unaware, the para-elemental planes are the intersection of 2 elemental planes. In the case of ice, the 2 intersecting planes are air and water. Given the uncommonness of magical beasts from the elemental planes, to me, that requires an uncommon origin. Perhaps it's the interaction between multiple planes that causes creatures besides elementals and outsiders to come into being on these inner planes. The overlapping magical energies allow for more building blocks to come together, which allows for the development of different types of life, such as the magical beast. You can only build air elementals out of air magic, but throw in water and ice magic, and in that maelstrom where the 3 touch in that primordial soup of life, coming out of that, you get the frost salamander. The problem I have looking at all the para-elemental planes is I just don't think the Thunderworm came from ice, magma, ooze, or smoke. Looking for where the Thunderworm could have come from, I think no matter where I end up going, I think we're starting with the plane of air. That just feels right. Another reason I'm happy to start with the air plane is because one of the adjacent planes to that is the quasi-elemental plane of lightning. The quasi-elemental planes are where an energy plane intersects with an elemental plane instead of the 2 elemental planes. But otherwise, it's really much the same idea as the para-elemental planes. Basically, 2 forms of magical power creating a 3rd. In the case of the quasi-elemental plane of lightning, this is where the elemental plane of air and the positive energy plane overlap. The positive energy plane being the energy plane of life, which is really very interesting. I think we got a home here. Bordering the plane of positive energy, to me, the plane of lightning is more than capable of sustaining a wide variety of flora and fauna, such as a giant cloud monster. I can just picture the glowing storms where these planes meet, swirling masses of light and wind. With air magic, life magic, and unified lightning magic all coming together, what we get is the perfect storm, pun 100% intended, for the birth of the Thunderworm. Probably not too surprising, ultimately, that the living storm monsters likely came from the elemental plane of lightning, but no less cool, as well as really a very unique set piece for a party of adventurers to go to, should they need to encounter a Thunderworm. And they better hope this encounter is under very good circumstances, because Thunderworms do not play around. When it comes to their mechanics, a Thunderworm is more along the lines of an elemental challenge than a simple magical beast. As a CR21 gargantuan monstrosity, I really liken the Thunderworm to a storm. Well, a storm that can think and reason with its intelligence of 14 and a wisdom of 19. Given that it's a monstrosity and can speak languages, to me, a Thunderworm does not rely on animalistic instinct, but is capable of reasoning as any other mortal. So a storm that can think. Terrifying. As fitting being a storm, a Thunderworm is incredibly resilient. Resistant to weapon damage, it's also immune to lightning, thunder, and oh so many conditions. Stealth is also a trained skill, which to me is how easily it can hide amongst the sky, amongst the clouds, or even in a thick fog. Adding to its hardiness is really all of its traits. defensive shock blasts anyone nearby with lightning, so no one really wants to be near it. Like the air elemental, air form means the thunderworm can go anywhere it wants to so long as there's a gap that it can fit through, that air can fit through. Finally, magic resistance means those pesky spellcasters are going to be having a hard time dealing with it, with their spells. Offensively, the thunderworm can blast people with its incorporeal touch or unleash a thunderclap to blast anyone nearby. Honestly, the incorporeal touch and the multi-attack are there because, well, they kind of have to be, as a last resort sort of action, or if the thunderworm really has nothing better to do. And it's going to have something better to do starting with Thunderclap. As a powerful AoE, Thunderclap really is no joke in a fight. It hits hard in 3.5, and I kept it striking just as hard in 5th edition with my version. A looming threat as dangerous as a dragon's breath. Now, when I said the Thunderworm's going to have something better to do, if it's not Thunderclap, it's going to be Engulf. The real trick a Thunderworm has up its sleeve is Engulf. Like the Gelatinous Cube, the Thunderworm can move into the spaces of other creatures and trap them within its own body. It's gargantuan size, so that means the Thunderworm really amps up the danger of Engulf compared to the Cube, since it can bring so many more and larger creatures into itself. Once trapped, it gets worse for the creatures that are essentially stuck inside, because they're stuck inside of a storm, getting blasted by lightning and thunder, unable to move or speak. All they can do is try to fight their way out of a storm. A storm that can fly, so if you do manage to get out of it, you might be hundreds of feet in the air and falling. Honestly, really like investigating the Thunderworm, diving deep into its mechanics. A fight with a Thunderworm just feels like it's going to be a harrowing affair. It's going to be hard to pin down thanks to all its immunities, magic resistance, and its incorporeal movement. It's also going to be hard to keep away thanks to its 60-foot fly speed, and once again, the incorporeal movement, which allows it to attack not just from above, but honestly from kind of any angle. As with most creatures that can fly, a Thunderworm wants to stay in the air. However, given its lack of range options, as well as really wanting to engulf people, it's going to swoop down to attack. I think the opening move in any fight for a Thunderworm is Thunderclap, since it hits like a train, and then that way you can start the recharge. After that, I see the priority as engulfing as many creatures as possible, especially spellcasters, since Engulf prevents the casting of spells with verbal component. Plus, every round, those Engulf are just going to get blasted by the Thunderworm's internal storm. After that, after engulfing as many as it can, I see the Thunderworm as flying high as possible on that turn or the very next one, for one very specific reason: fall damage. Should a creature manage to wiggle its way out of the engulf, they're going to end up in an unoccupied space within 5 feet of the Thunderworm, which might mean empty air and thus falling damage. After that, I think it's really a rinse and repeat. Thunderclap as much as possible, and then going down to engulf anyone who managed to escape, as well as any fresh faces who missed it before. Anyone who flies after it can get hit with the incorporeal touch and defensive shock if there's no more room inside of the Thunderworm form. Not being a dumb animal, I think should the Thunderworm get close to death, it'll run, taking full advantage of its fly speed, incorporeal movement, and stealth to disappear amongst the clouds. Maybe with a few things still in its tummy. As a CR 21 monster, on par with an ancient black dragon or the Archhag, a Thunderworm is a terrible threat to a party of 4 level 15 or lower adventurers. Its Thunderclap does 108 damage, which is more than some parties have in total hit points for a lot of levels. That being said, I think the Thunderworm can still be encountered if you do it just right. And I think the way to do that is treating it as a storm. Perhaps there's an island with a lot of runes on it that a Thunderworm has made their home and is very, very jealous of it. On this island is something that the players desperately need, so they need to find a way to get past the Thunderworm. Low-level players would be hopelessly outgunned by this thing. They would have virtually no chances of defeating the Thunderworm in combat. But there is more than one way to slay a beast. Perhaps the players can try to sneak past, setting up distractions as they sneak into the ancient ruins looking for what they need. Perhaps the players try to negotiate. The Thunderworm can't leave the island, but maybe it needs something that the players can get for as trade. Perhaps there's a creature or an individual that is strong enough to defeat the Thunderworm, or at least drive it away, which means the party has to figure out a way to draw them to the island. The most important thing with this level of power imbalance is giving the players a meaningful choice, giving them a real choice and an edge for this encounter. They may not be able to beat in combat, but combat is only one way to defeat a monster. One Thunderworm is a living storm. What about a whole group of them? Perhaps the world has a storm that never ends, known as the Eternal Storm, seemingly wandering across the planet, often towards points of civilization or sacred sites, where it unleashes powerful winds, rain, and more importantly, lightning that scars and devastates the land. There are even stories and rumors that some people go missing as the Eternal Storm rages by. The players one day could get caught in the storm and discover that it's not actually a storm, but a huge pod made of thunderworms. A pod that is extremely agitated. The players discover that there's actually something driving this pod, some foul mind that is herding the pod of thunderworms and thus the Eternal Storm to places it wants to see devastated. The players would then have to figure out the mystery of who's behind it, investigating the locations to see what they have in common and who wants to see them destroyed. The places themselves are just like the tip of the iceberg. People have gone missing. The storm could be a cover for assassinations or kidnappings. How about a story of a cloud giant who has control over a thunderworm? Cloud giants tend to view themselves as godlike beings with their storm powers, who can manipulate and steal from terrestrial beings with impunity. We could have a cloud giant that has captured and hidden away a thunderworm's nest and all its eggs, I guess? Once again, it's a living creature, so it has to, breed. Anyway, threatening the worm's children, the cloud giant has a dangerous weapon to use in its raids against the earthbound creatures. The thunderworm, for all its power, can't hurt the cloud giant, who has it set up that if anything happens to it, the eggs will get crushed. The party could be hired to figure out a way to stop the devastating raids by the cloud giant. During one of these raids, the thunderworm is able to hide long enough from the giant to beg for help from the players to save its children. How, since it can't speak, I leave up to the DM. If the party can find a way to save the worm's eggs, they're going to have one heck of an ace up their sleeves when facing down that cloud giant. As I poked around Fiendfolio, I didn't know what to expect when I first saw the picture of a cloudworm with lightning shooting out. That's not true. I was expecting an elemental. If you take nothing else from this video, I was expecting an elemental. Instead, what I got was a take on how weird and wonderful it is when the planes of existence interact with each other. This thunderworm with lightning shooting out is the level of weird I want out of D&D, and I love them for it. And I hope you do too. In the description below, I have a link to a monster stat block for the Thunderworm updated to the 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, ready for you to unleash upon your players. As we are a growing channel, if you found this interesting, please leave a like and subscribe for all our future videos. It really does mean the world. Let me thank all of you for your time and wishing you all the best until we meet again for our next monster.